All right, this time it's working. All right, so just in case you are needing to watch this particular video online, this is day 2. And the main thing that's going to happen today, or the main task that you need to perform, is to actually draw the vectors from the list that you got yesterday. So I'm going to lay out exactly how I want this done. So yesterday you had your graph paper and you established your polar coordinate system on here by establishing your axes and labeling our 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270 degrees. So now, and this is about as basic as it gets, your first task is, I just want you to draw all of these vectors that I gave you on that list. Now, just for a sample, vector A is 5.0 centimeters at 26 degrees. So when you go to draw one of these vectors graphically, what's the first thing you got to measure? The angle. Because if you are worried about how long it is, you could have a complete circle that you could create. So the first thing you actually have to measure is your angle. So you're going to measure up 26 degrees, and then starting at the origin, you are going to make a straight line that is 5 centimeters long. Okay? Now, as far as this goes on your paper, I do not want to see the angular measure. Okay? So I just put that up there so that you could see that. That should not go on here. All right? So really, after your first step, drawing the vector, all you have is a straight line. What do you have to add to make it the vector?
Arrow.
The little arrow indicator. Now, this is where I am going to super strongly suggest, do not put your arrow indicator at the very tip. Bring it back just a little bit so that we know which way it points, but leave the end just as the end of a line. Okay? Because that way the arrow tip doesn't end up altering literally how long the vector is. Once you have drawn the vector, I do want you to label them. But I want you to label out at the end of the vector. I have some people who want to label it like right on the vector, but you're going to be drawing a whole bunch of them. So that's just going to make the pattern busier. So out at the end, put the letter and include the arrow above it. Once you're done with vector A, you move on to vector B and C, and you just keep drawing them till you're done. Now, if you already in your head go, I know what I'm doing. When you're done, if you showed this to somebody and go, what do you see? What would they probably say the thing looks like?
Star.
What?
A star.
Yeah, usually I get like a star-shaped pattern because you got stuff going outward from the middle, like in all different directions. When you are finished, when it comes to, I want full credit on this, it does come down to accuracy. So if you have a buddy who is working on this when you are both done, one of you can take both of your papers, line them up, and hold them up to the light and see if everything matches. If they all match, I'm going to say that's a good sign, unless somehow you both screwed one up the same way, which is a possibility, but highly unlikely. And if you see any that don't match, that means somebody made a mistake. And you can go back and correct it. And that's why you need to use a pencil on this. When you go to measure your angle, depending on how meticulous you were about drawing your axes, because this came up last period, somebody said, how do I line up the protractor? And I kind of wanted to say, shouldn't you just line it up on the axis and that should be just fine? And really it wasn't, because they didn't draw their axes very nicely on top of the blue grid that's already on the paper. Use the blue grid to line up your protractor, because wherever your origin is, I'm going to use the blue grid lines to lay my transparency on top of that. So if you were nice and meticulous about making your axes on the blue grid, you got no problems with this. But if you made a sloppy set of axes that are not on the blue grid, do not use the axes you've drawn to line up your protractor. Use the blue grid lines. Okay, so with that, are there any questions? Okay, so I may be back with additional stuff at the end of the period, but maybe not.